The cold stones of the well scraped against Emma's tiny palms as she clawed at the darkness, her 3-year-old lungs burning with each desperate cry that nobody would hear. As the silver moon cast its indifferent light through the circular opening above, she realized with terrifying clarity that her own family had left her here to die simply because she was born different. Before we continue, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, like the video, and comment where in the world you're watching from. Let's go. Arizona Territory, 1873. The cry that echoed through the small cabin that autumn night was feeble, barely audible above the howling wind that swept across the desert plains. Martha Blackwood clutched her newborn daughter to her breast, her face pale with exhaustion, but glowing with a mother's fierce love. The midwife, Mrs. Abernathy, frowned as she cleaned her hands in a basin of water tinged pink with birth blood. "She's mighty small, Martha," the midwife said, her voice low as she cast a wary glance at the closed door, beyond which Martha's new husband, Thomas, paced like a caged mountain lion. "Smallest baby I've birthed that lived through the night." Martha's fingers traced the delicate features of her daughter's face. The child was indeed tiny, her limbs thin as twigs, her face scrunched like a dried apple doll. But her eyes, when they fluttered open between sleeping breaths, were alert, intelligent, filled with an ancient knowing that made Martha's heart clench with both pride and fear. "She'll grow," Martha whispered, more prayer than statement. "The good Lord just made her small to start. My Emma will catch up." Mrs. Abernathy's lips thinned to a hard line. The men round these parts, they put stock in signs and portents. A child born this small during the blood moon. She didn't finish her thought, didn't need to. Martha pulled Emma closer, her jaw set in defiance. "My husband will love her as his own. He promised me when he married me last winter." The door creaked open, and Thomas Blackwood filled the frame with his broad shoulders and stern countenance. His eyes, dark as a starless night, fixed on the bundle in Martha's arms. "Let me see the child," he demanded, voice gruff from hours of smoking his pipe on the porch while waiting for his stepchild to be born. Martha hesitated only a moment before turning the blanket down. Emma's face, serene in sleep, seemed even smaller under Thomas's looming shadow. His expression darkened, a storm cloud gathering on his weathered face. "What's wrong with it?" he asked, not stepping closer. "Nothing's wrong with her," Martha insisted, color rising to her cheeks. "She's just small is all. She'll grow strong." Thomas grunted, unconvinced. "My mother bore 8 children, all healthy-sized. My first wife gave me 2 strapping boys before the fever took her. Never saw a living child so unfinished." Mrs. Abernathy gathered her things, sensing the tension thickening like desert dust in the air. "Some children take time to grow into themselves, Mr. Blackwood. This one has a strong heart. I've seen smaller ones thrive." But Thomas had already turned away, disappointment etched in the rigid line of his shoulders. "I've got a ranch to run. The boys need feeding." The door slammed behind him, leaving Martha alone with her daughter, and the unspoken question that would haunt the cabin for years to come. Would Emma ever be enough? In the months that followed, Emma Blackwood defied and confirmed fears in equal measure. She survived, clutching to life with surprising tenacity. But she didn't grow as other babies did. By her first birthday, she was still the size of a newborn, though her eyes tracked movement with uncanny awareness, and she babbled attempts at words that children twice her age were just mastering. Martha defended her fiercely against whispers, against Thomas's growing resentment, against his son's taunts. But when the drought came in Emma's second year, followed by a blight that withered their crops to dust, the whispers grew louder. Thomas's gaze, whenever it fell on Emma, turned from disappointment to something darker, more dangerous. "Unnatural," he muttered once, when he thought Martha couldn't hear. The land knows when something ain't right. Martha held Emma tighter that night, singing softly into her daughter's wispy hair, trying to drown out the fear that grew like a shadow across their lives. By Emma's 3rd birthday, Martha's defenses were wearing thin. The drought had stretched into its 2nd year, turning the once promising homestead into a patch of cracked earth that swallowed seeds and hope with equal disregard. Thomas's older boys, William and James, now 13 and 11, had grown from cautious curiosity about their strange stepsister to open disdain. "Pa says she's cursed," William told his younger brother one evening as they fetched water from the creek that had dwindled to little more than a trickle. "Says that's why the rain won't come." James, who still remembered his mother's soft touch before the fever took her, felt a flicker of sympathy for the tiny girl who watched them from the cabin window, her large eyes following their movements like a bird tracking predators. "She can't help being small." "Don't matter," William replied, his voice hardening with the practiced cruelty of children who mimic their elders' fears. "Pa says things that ain't natural bring bad luck, and our luck's been nothing but bad since she came." Inside the cabin, Martha cradled Emma in her lap, brushing the child's fine hair with gentle strokes. Despite being 3 years old, Emma was no bigger than a 1-year-old, though her mind seemed sharper than most children 5 years her senior. She spoke in full, clear sentences, asked questions that made Martha's breath catch with their insight, and moved with a careful deliberation that seemed almost adult. "Why does Thomas hate me?" Emma asked suddenly, her small fingers tracing the worry lines that had deepened on Martha's forehead. Martha's hand stilled. "He doesn't hate you, sweet pea. He's just afraid of what he doesn't understand." "He thinks I made the rain stop," Emma said matter-of-factly. It wasn't a question. Martha pulled her daughter closer, breathing in the scent of sun and dust that clung to her hair. "The rain will come again, and Thomas will see that you're a blessing, not a curse." But the rain didn't come. That night, as a dry lightning storm crackled across the distant mountains, Martha overheard Thomas speaking with Jebediah Stone, their nearest neighbor, whose ranch lay 5 miles to the east. "There are ways to deal with such things," Jebediah was saying, his voice low but carrying through the open window, where Martha stood frozen, Emma sleeping fitfully in her arms. "My grandmother came from the old country. She knew about changelings and spirit children." "Emma ain't no changeling," Thomas replied, but his voice lacked conviction. "She's just wrong somehow, like she ain't growing proper. When the crops fail 3 years running, a man's got to look at what's changed," Jebediah insisted. "Since that child came, your land's turned against you. Mine too, being so close. Folk in town are starting to talk." Martha backed away from the window, heart hammering against her ribs. She'd heard the whispers in town, seen the crossed fingers and averted eyes when she carried Emma to the general store. Even Pastor Wilson, who preached God's love for all his children, had suggested special prayers for Emma's affliction. The next morning, Martha found Thomas sharpening his hunting knife on the porch steps, his face set in grim lines. "What are you doing?" she asked, Emma clinging to her skirts, sensing the tension that crackled between her parents like the previous night's lightning. "Going hunting," Thomas replied, not looking up. "Jebediah thinks he saw deer tracks up by the North Ridge." "There hasn't been a deer in these parts since spring," Martha said, suspicion tightening her throat. Thomas looked up then, his eyes flat and cold. "Then I'll hunt whatever I find." His gaze dropped to Emma, who stared back at him with unchildlike solemnity. Something passed between them, an acknowledgement perhaps, that they were adversaries in a battle Martha couldn't fully see. That night, Thomas didn't return. Martha paced the cabin floor, jumping at every creak and whistle of the wind. When dawn broke, casting long shadows through the dusty windows, she saw him trudging up the path, empty-handed but with a curious lightness to his step. "Found no game," he announced, hanging his hat on a peg by the door. But I found something else. An old well, stone-lined up by the ridge, still has water clear as crystal. He smiled, a gesture that didn't reach his eyes. Might be our salvation, Martha. Might be exactly what we need. The old stone well became an obsession for Thomas. Each morning before dawn, he would disappear with empty buckets and return hours later, water sloshing against the wooden sides, his face animated with a fervor that made Martha uneasy. He insisted the water was special, sweet as heaven and twice as pure, he'd say, pouring it reverently onto his withered corn stalks and watching with hungry eyes for signs of revival. Martha noticed how he never offered this miracle water to Emma. When the child reached for a dipper at supper one evening, Thomas's hand shot out, knocking it from her grasp. "Not for you," he said, voice low and dangerous. "The well doesn't want you to drink from it." Emma withdrew her hand silently, those two knowing eyes never leaving Thomas's face. Martha felt the cold fingers of dread wrap around her heart. "Wells don't want things, Thomas," she said carefully, refilling Emma's cup from their regular water barrel. "They're just holes in the ground with water at the bottom." Thomas's laugh was brittle as dead leaves. "Shows what you know, woman. That well is older than any settler in these parts. The stones are cut in ways no white man's hands made them." He leaned forward, his gaze intense. "Jebediah says the Indians avoid that ridge. Says they believe a spirit lives in those waters, deciding who deserves the gift of life." That night, Martha barred the cabin door from the inside for the first time since she'd married Thomas. She tucked Emma into the small trundle bed beside her own, smoothing the child's hair back from her forehead. "Mama," Emma whispered, her voice small but steady, "the well is bad." Martha's hand stilled. "You've never seen the well, sweet pea." "I see it in my dreams," Emma replied, eyes wide and solemn in the lamplight. "It's deep and dark, and it whispers things that aren't true." Martha gathered her daughter close, fighting the trembling in her limbs. "Nothing's going to hurt you, Emma. I promise." The words felt hollow, like echoes in a dried-up riverbed. The following week brought a rare cloudburst, a teasing taste of the rain they so desperately needed. The crops perked up briefly before wilting again under the relentless sun. Thomas took it as a sign. "The well is working," he insisted, pounding his fist on the rough-hewn table. "But something's blocking its full power." His gaze slid to Emma, who sat quietly molding a small dough figure Martha had given her to play with. Martha noticed how the boys, especially William, had begun to mirror their father's superstitious fervor. They sprinkled well water on their boots each morning, muttered strange words Jebediah had taught them, and made a show of keeping their distance from Emma. Late one afternoon, as storm clouds gathered on the horizon, promising rain that never seemed to arrive, Martha discovered her sewing scissors missing. She found them hours later, hidden beneath William's mattress, along with a lock of hair. Emma's distinctive pale gold strands, unmistakable even in the dim light. When confronted, William's face flushed red with defiance. "Jebediah says we need a piece of her to show the well what's poisoning the land," he blurted. "Pa said it was all right." That night, Martha made her decision. She packed a small bundle, some clothes, what little food she could spare, the silver locket that had belonged to her mother. Tomorrow, she would take Emma and flee, perhaps to her cousin's home in California, far from Thomas's growing madness. But morning came with the deep, rattling cough that had plagued Martha since winter. By noon, she was feverish, barely able to stand. Emma brought her water, her tiny hands steady as she held the cup to her mother's lips. "Just rest, Mama," she said with that uncanny maturity. "I'll watch for them." Martha drifted in and out of consciousness as the day wore on. Through the haze of fever, she was dimly aware of Thomas and the boys returning early from the fields, of hushed voices and heavy footsteps. She tried to call out, When she realized Emma was no longer by her side, but her voice emerged as nothing more than a hoarse whisper, the sunset painted the cabin walls blood red as Thomas returned alone. Martha struggled to sit up, panic clearing her fever-fogged mind. "Where is she?" she demanded, voice cracking. "Where's Emma?" Thomas avoided her gaze, busying himself with lighting the lamp. "The well accepted our offering," he said finally, his voice flat and empty of emotion. "The rain will come now." Martha's scream echoed across the barren fields as she clawed her way from the bed, her legs buckling beneath her. But she knew, even as Thomas restrained her with terrifying ease, that she was too late. At the bottom of the old stone well, Emma huddled against the damp rocks, her tiny body shivering in the growing darkness. Above, a circle of fading daylight marked a world that had rejected her. The splash of her tears joined the shallow pool of water below, ripples spreading outward like the silent cry that no one but the desert wind could hear. Takoda moved like a shadow across the parched landscape, his moccasined feet making no sound on the rocky terrain. The Apache warrior had left his band 3 days prior, seeking solitude after burying his wife and infant son, taken by the same sickness that had swept through their camp like an angry spirit. At 30 winters, Takoda had seen enough death to harden his heart. But this loss had hollowed him, left him drifting between worlds, not dead, but no longer fully alive. He traveled light, a knife at his belt, a bow and quiver of arrows on his back, a small pouch of pemmican, and a water skin that was running dangerously low. The drought had not spared Apache lands any more than it had the white settlers' farms. Water was life, and life was growing scarce. As dusk settled over the hills, Takoda's keen eyes spotted a ridge that might offer shelter for the night. He knew this territory was contested. White ranchers had pushed boundaries ever further into lands his people had hunted for generations, but necessity outweighed caution. He needed water soon, or his journey would end here, his bones joining the sun-bleached remains of other desert wanderers. The rising moon illuminated a landscape of twisted juniper and sage. Takoda paused, listening to the night sounds, the whisper of wind through dry grass, the distant yip of a coyote, and something else. A sound so faint he might have imagined it. He stood motionless, every sense alert. There it came again, a whimper, high-pitched and weak, like the cry of an injured kit fox. Takoda followed the sound, moving with the practiced stealth of a lifetime spent hunting and avoiding being hunted. The cries led him to a clearing where an old stone well stood in eerie silence, its circular wall rising from the earth like the entrance to a spirit world. Takoda approached cautiously, recognizing the ancient construction. His grandfather had spoken of such wells, built by the ancient ones long before either Apache or white men claimed these lands. Sacred places to be respected and feared in equal measure. The crying had stopped. Takoda peered over the edge, seeing nothing but darkness. He was about to turn away, convinced he had followed a trick of the wind, when a small sound echoed up from below. A hitching breath, too deliberate to be anything but human. "Hello," he called softly in English, a language he had learned through years of uneasy trading with settlers. When no answer came, he tried again in his native tongue. A tiny voice responded in English, tremulous and weak. "Please, help." Without hesitation, Takoda unwound the leather rope from his waist. He secured one end to a sturdy juniper near the well's edge, tested its strength, then lowered himself into the darkness. The stone walls were slick with moisture, a stark contrast to the arid world above. As he descended, the temperature dropped noticeably, raising gooseflesh on his bare arms. His feet touched water, shallow but cold, and he squinted in the darkness. There, huddled against the curved stone wall, was a child so small he first mistook her for a toddler. Her pale hair gleamed faintly in what little moonlight reached the bottom of the well. She stared at him with eyes wide with fear and the last embers of hope. "Little one," he said gently in English, "I will not harm you." The child didn't shrink from him as he expected. Instead, she reached out with a tiny hand, her fingers ice cold when they touched his. "Are you real?" she whispered. The simple question pierced Dakota's grief-numbed heart like an arrowhead. "Yes, I am real," he answered, crouching in the shallow water. "How long have you been here?" "Since the sun was high," she said, her voice steadier now. "Father and William put me here. They said the well needed me so the rain would come." There was no self-pity in her tone, only a matter-of-fact acceptance that made Dakota's chest tighten with anger. He had heard of the white settlers' superstitions, but this, sacrificing a child to appease some misunderstood spirit, struck him as a particular cruelty. Without another word, he gathered the girl into his arms. She weighed almost nothing, a bundle of bones and courage wrapped in a thin cotton dress. "Hold tight to me, little one," he instructed, securing her against his chest with one arm. "We will leave this darkness together." As they emerged from the well into the silver moonlight, Dakota looked down at the child's face and made a silent vow. The dead could not be brought back, not his wife, not his son. But this small life might yet be saved. Emma shivered against Dakota's chest as the night wind swept across the ridge. Her clothes were damp from the well water, her small body radiating a dangerous chill. Dakota knew the first task was to get her warm and dry. He scanned the horizon, weighing his options. Returning her to the settler's cabin was unthinkable. The people who had thrown her into darkness would show no mercy if she returned. His own camp was a 3-day journey to the south, too far for a child in her condition. "What is your name, little one?" he asked, wrapping his leather vest around her shoulders. "Emma," she replied, her teeth chattering. "Emma Blackwood." "I am Dakota," he told her, gathering dry brush for a small fire. "It means friend to all in my language." Emma watched with solemn eyes as he worked, never complaining, though her limbs trembled uncontrollably. When the flames caught, sending golden light dancing across the rocky ground, Dakota removed his buckskin shirt and gently helped Emma out of her wet dress, wrapping her in the dry garment instead. The sleeves hung well past her fingertips, the hem pooling around her feet like a ceremonial robe. "You're an Indian," Emma stated, no fear in her voice, only curiosity. "Apache," Dakota corrected, settling her close to the fire's warmth, "and you are very small for a white child." "I don't grow like other children," Emma explained, with the directness of one who had heard her difference discussed countless times. "Mother said I'm just as I should be, but father—" Her voice caught, the betrayal still too fresh. Dakota nodded, understanding more than she said. "Some see difference as weakness. They are blind to the strength it brings." Emma's gaze was unnervingly steady for a child so young. "Are you taking me back to them?" "No," Dakota replied without hesitation. "They have lost the right to call you daughter." Relief softened her features, making her look briefly like the 3-year-old she was. "Where will we go?" "First, we find safer shelter for the night," Dakota decided, surveying the open ridge. "Then, when the sun rises, we will decide our path." Vidi. He extinguished the fire after Emma's clothes had dried, not wanting to risk attracting attention from the Blackwood Ranch. Carrying her in one arm, his bow at the ready in his free hand, Dakota descended the ridge toward a stand of cottonwoods that suggested water, real water, not the stagnant puddle at the bottom of the cursed well. The cottonwood grove concealed a small spring, barely more than a seep, but enough to replenish their water skins. Nearby, a hollow beneath a sandstone overhang offered shelter from both weather and unfriendly eyes. Dakota laid a bed of soft grasses, creating a nest for Emma, who watched his every move with intelligent curiosity. "You move like the deer," she observed. "Silent, careful, Takoda's lips curved slightly. "And you watch like the owl. Nothing escapes your eyes." Her stomach growled audibly, and Takoda realized she likely hadn't eaten since before being thrown into the well. He offered her pemmican, showing her how to soften the dried meat and berries by holding it in her mouth before chewing. She ate slowly, savoring each bite with the appreciation of one who had known hunger before. "Thomas, Father, said the well spirit would feed me," she said between bites, her tone matter-of-fact. "Mother told me spirits aren't real, but I felt something in the water. It touched my feet." Takoda kept his expression neutral, though a chill ran through him. The old wells were indeed powerful places, but not in the way white settlers imagined. His people knew better than to disturb such sites, or worse, to offer sacrifices to whatever might dwell within them. "Perhaps it was a frog," he suggested gently. Emma shook her head with conviction. "It wanted me to sleep, but I knew if I closed my eyes in the water I wouldn't wake up again." She looked up at him, her gaze disconcertingly direct. "Did your spirit tell you to find me?" The question caught Takoda off guard. For a moment, he saw his son's face superimposed over Emma's, the same trusting eyes, the same silent plea for protection. He had failed his own child. He would not fail this one who had been placed in his path. "Perhaps," he acknowledged, "my wife and son walk the spirit path now. Maybe they sent me to you." Emma nodded, accepting this with the simplicity of a child who had already seen too much of both cruelty and wonder to be surprised by either. She yawned, her small body finally surrendering to exhaustion. As she drifted to sleep, curled against his side like a fox kit in its den, Takoda contemplated what dawn would bring. His people were cautious of outsiders, especially white ones. But Emma was clearly not like other white children, not just in size, but in spirit. She had survived what would have killed many grown men: betrayal, abandonment, the cold embrace of the well's depths. His decision crystallized as her breathing deepened into sleep. He would take her to his people, not as a captive or hostage, as sometimes happened in the endless conflicts between settlers and tribes, but as a child in need of a new family, as someone who might, in her own way, help heal the wound left by his son's passing. Outside their shelter, an owl hooted once, its call echoing across the night-shrouded landscape. Takoda took it as a sign of approval. Dawn broke over the desert in a blaze of pink and gold, illuminating a landscape transformed. Overnight, the drought-parched earth had received a gentle blessing, not the torrent Thomas Blackwood had prayed for, but a soft, steady rain that left droplets clinging to sage and creosote like tiny crystal beads. Takoda stood at the mouth of their shelter, reading the morning sky with practiced eyes. The rain had passed, but clouds still hung heavy on the horizon. "The well spirit sent rain," Emma said quietly behind him, her voice neither frightened nor triumphant, simply observant. Takoda turned to find her standing in the oversized buckskin shirt, looking like a small medicine woman draped in ceremonial garb. Her blonde hair, dried now, formed a halo of wispy curls around her solemn face. "Not because of you being in it," Takoda assured her firmly. "The rain comes when it chooses. No sacrifice makes it so." Emma nodded, accepting his wisdom without question. She had already begun to trust his words over the cruel superstitions that had ruled her short life. "Will they come looking for me?" she asked, her gaze drifting toward the direction of the Blackwood Ranch, invisible beyond the rolling hills. "Perhaps," Takoda acknowledged, not wanting to shield her from difficult truths. "But they believe the well took you. They will not expect to find you walking with an Apache." He helped her dress in her now dry clothes, her movements deft and self-sufficient despite her tiny size. When he offered her dried berries from his pouch, she ate methodically, carefully saving a few in her pocket for later. a habit born of uncertainty about when her next meal might come. "My people's camp is a 3-day journey," Dakota explained as they prepared to leave. "The path is not easy. Can you walk far, little owl?" Emma straightened her shoulders. "I walked to town with Mother once. 5 miles there and back." Dakota suppressed a smile at her determination. "Today, we will go 7 miles, maybe more. When your legs tire, you will ride on my shoulders." Their progress was slow but steady. Emma moved with surprising stamina, her diminutive legs working twice as hard to cover the same ground as Dakota's long strides. She asked questions constantly about plants they passed, animals whose tracks marked the sandy soil, clouds that shaped and reshaped themselves overhead. Unlike most children her age, she listened to his answers with complete attention, her mind seeming to catalogue each piece of information. By midday, they had covered nearly 4 miles. Dakota found a sheltered spot beneath a red sandstone outcropping where they could rest and eat. As he divided their meager rations, he noticed Emma studying his hands, her head tilted in contemplation. "Your fingers know things mine don't," she observed. "They make fire faster than Thomas. They find water where there isn't any." "They have had more winters to learn," Dakota replied. "Your hands will grow skilled too, even if the rest of me doesn't grow." The question held no self-pity, only pragmatic curiosity. Dakota considered her thoughtfully. "The hummingbird is small, but its wings beat faster than the eagle's. It finds sweetness the larger birds cannot reach." He pointed to a narrow crevice in the rock face beside them, where a tiny cactus bloomed, its crimson flower almost hidden from view. "Some paths are made for those who do not take up much space." Emma absorbed this, a new perspective visibly taking root. She crawled to the crevice, her small arm able to reach the flower that Dakota's could not. "I can be like the hummingbird," she decided, touching the silky petals with gentle fingers. Their moment of peace shattered at the distant crack of a rifle shot. Dakota was on his feet instantly, senses alert to the direction of the sound. 2 more shots followed, closer than the first. "Hunters," Emma whispered, shrinking against the rock wall. Dakota shook his head grimly. "Hunters don't waste bullets shooting at nothing. They are searching, making noise to frighten anyone hiding." He didn't need to specify who they might be. Without another word, he gathered their few belongings and lifted Emma onto his back, securing her with a quick loop of leather. "Hold tight, little owl," he murmured. "We must move like shadows now." As they slipped away from their resting place, melting into the complex terrain of ravines and mesas, Emma's arms circled Dakota's neck, her cheek pressed against his shoulder. Though fear quickened her heartbeat, her body remained calm against his, a small warrior already learning that survival sometimes meant embracing the silence of the hunted. They moved through the landscape like wraiths, Dakota choosing paths that left minimal tracks. Hard stone, gravelly washes, rocky plateaus where their footprints wouldn't betray them. The gunshots had stopped, but the silence felt more threatening than the noise. Searchers who fired randomly were careless. Those who moved quietly were hunters with purpose. By late afternoon, dark clouds gathered again, bringing both blessing and curse. The rain would mask their trail, but also slow their progress. Dakota found a narrow cave in the side of a steep arroyo, just as the first heavy drops began to fall. Inside, Emma huddled close, her eyes huge in the dimness. "Are they looking for me or you?" she asked, perceptive enough to understand that an Apache warrior and a white child made an unusual pair. "Both, perhaps," Dakota admitted. "There is a story they will tell themselves, that I stole you from your bed, that I am the monster, not those who threw you into darkness." Emma's tiny hand found his, her fingers surprisingly warm despite the chill in the air. "You're not a monster, you're Dakota, friend to all." Something in his chest loosened at her simple faith. Not since his wife's death had anyone touched him with such unguarded trust. "When the rain stops," he said, "we will continue south. My people move with the seasons, but they will be camping near the Dragoon Mountains now. Will they want me?" The question held no desperation, only a child's practical need to understand what awaited her. Takoda chose his words carefully. "Some will be cautious. The Apache and the white settlers have shed each other's blood for many seasons, but others will see what I see, a brave spirit in a small body." Emma nodded, accepting his honesty. "Mother said I was special, that God had a purpose for making me small." "Perhaps she was right," Takoda agreed, "though I think your purpose is yours to find, not given by any god." The rain continued through the night, a steady drumbeat on the parched earth. They shared the last of Takoda's pemmican and slept in turns, though Emma's watch consisted mainly of her fighting to keep her eyes open while Takoda feigned sleep, alert to every sound beyond their shelter. Dawn brought clearing skies and renewed vigilance. They set out early, keeping to the shadows wherever possible. Around midday, Takoda froze, raising a hand to signal silence. Voices drifted toward them on the breeze, men speaking English, at least 3 of them, approaching from the east. "Waste of time," one was saying, voice carrying in the still air. "Girls probably coyote food by now." "Thomas says check every cave and hollow," another replied. "Says he won't rest till he knows for sure." "Thomas just wants to be sure there's no witness," a third voice added, lower but still audible. "Always knew there was something wrong with how he treated that child." Takoda scanned their surroundings with sharp eyes. They were exposed, caught on a stretch of open ground between 2 stands of scrubby juniper. No time to reach either. His gaze fell on a depression in the earth nearby, a collapsed burrow perhaps, or a small erosion channel. "Little owl," he whispered, "can you hide in that hole while I lead them away?" Emma assessed the hollow with a practical eye. "Yes," she said simply. "Stay there until the voices are gone. If I don't return by sunset, follow the North Star until you reach the stream we crossed this morning. Follow it downward. Water leads to people." Her face remained composed, though fear flickered in her eyes. "You'll come back." It wasn't a question, but Takoda answered anyway. "I will find you, Emma. This I promise." She slipped into the depression, her tiny body easily concealed by the overhang. Takoda covered her with a light layer of brush, careful to leave her room to breathe. Then, without looking back, he circled away, deliberately leaving tracks in a westerly direction, perpendicular to their original path. He moved quickly but loudly enough to attract attention, counting on the searcher's eagerness to find an easy culprit. The voices behind him grew more excited, then separated, 2 continuing to follow his false trail, 1 staying behind to search the area more thoroughly. Takoda cursed silently. He had hoped all 3 would pursue him. Now Emma faced danger alone, hidden in her shallow refuge, with only her wits and stillness to protect her. As he led his pursuers deeper into the maze of rock formations, Takoda found himself praying to spirits he had long since stopped believing heard his voice. "Keep her safe," he thought. "She has known enough betrayal." Emma lay perfectly still in her hiding place, barely breathing as heavy boots crunched over the ground nearby. She had learned stillness early in life, how to become so quiet that Thomas and the boys would forget she was in the room, sparing her their cruel words and rougher hands. Now that skill might save her life. "Tracks split here," a man's voice called out, not Thomas or his sons, but someone Emma recognized as Mr. Patterson from the neighboring ranch. "2 went west following the Indian. I'll keep searching this area." Emma pressed herself deeper into the depression, feeling the cool earth against her back. A lizard, disturbed by her presence, skittered past her face. She didn't flinch. Above, through the lattice of brush Dakota had arranged, she could see patches of blue sky and the occasional shadow as Patterson moved around the clearing. "Hell of a thing," the man muttered to himself, "using a well to get rid of your own kin. Thomas always was a superstitious fool." His footsteps paused alarmingly close to Emma's hiding place. She could see the worn leather of his boots through a gap in the brush, not 3 feet from her face. The man sighed heavily, then spat on the ground. "Poor little mite," he continued, talking to himself in the way of men accustomed to long stretches of solitude. "Should have stepped in sooner. Knew something wasn't right about how they treated her." Emma held her breath as a surge of unexpected emotion threatened to break her silence. This man, this neighbor who had never spoken directly to her on the few occasions she'd seen him at the general store, had recognized the wrongness of her situation when so many others had simply looked away. The boots turned, took 2 steps from her hiding place, then stopped again. "Damn peculiar," Patterson said. "Could have sworn I saw something." Emma's heart hammered so loudly she was certain he must hear it. A bead of sweat trickled down her temple, but she remained frozen, channeling every ounce of her will into invisibility. After what seemed an eternity, Patterson's boots crunched away, his muttering fading into the distance. She waited, counting slowly as her mother had taught her when learning patience. 100 counts passed, then another 100. The sun shifted overhead, sending dappled light through her brush covering. Still she waited, trusting Dakota's instruction to remain hidden until the voices were gone. Meanwhile, Dakota led his pursuers on a deliberate chase through increasingly difficult terrain. These men were ranchers, not trackers, and they tired quickly navigating the steep slopes and narrow passages he chose. When they finally stopped to catch their breath, Dakota concealed himself behind a large boulder, close enough to hear their conversation. "Lost the trail," one complained. A heavy-set man with a red bandana knotted around his neck. "Damn Indian could be anywhere by now." "Thomas ain't gonna like it," his companion replied, leaning on his rifle. "Said he'd pay extra if we brought back the Apache, dead or alive." "Thomas can go to hell," the first man spat. "I signed on to find a missing girl, not hunt a man through this godforsaken wilderness." "You getting soft on Injuns now, Carter?" "I'm getting tired of Thomas Blackwood's madness. First he throws his stepdaughter down a well because his crops won't grow. Then he swears an Apache stole her corpse for some heathen ritual." Carter shook his head. "Something ain't right in that story, and I want no part of it." The second man shifted uncomfortably. "So what do we tell Thomas? That we followed tracks till they disappeared in the rocks? Nothing but truth in that." Carter squinted at the sun. "Let's head back. Patterson's probably having no better luck." Dakota remained motionless until the men were well out of sight, their voices swallowed by the vastness of the desert. Only then did he begin making his way back to Emma, moving with far more stealth than he had when laying the false trail. The shadows had lengthened considerably by the time he reached the clearing where he'd left her. He approached cautiously, alert for any sign that Patterson still lurked nearby. The area seemed deserted. "Little owl," he called softly, crouching beside the depression. "It is Dakota. You can come out now." For a heartbeat, there was no response. Then the brush stirred, and Emma emerged like a desert spirit, dust smudging her face but her eyes bright with relief. "You came back," she whispered, reaching for him with complete trust. Dakota gathered her into his arms, a fierce protectiveness surging through him. "I promised I would." "A man was here," she told him as he checked her for any injuries. "He didn't see me. He said," her voice caught, "he said, Thomas threw me away." Dakota nodded gravely. "Some truths are hard to hear, even when we already know them in our hearts." "He wasn't looking very hard for me," Emma added, with the sharp insight that continually surprised Dakota. "I think he was pretending." They shared a smile of understanding before Dakota lifted her onto his shoulders. We must cover more ground before nightfall. The searchers will return to your stepfather's ranch with their failure, and he may send more men tomorrow." As they resumed their journey southward, Emma's small hands rested lightly on Takoda's head, her fingers occasionally playing with his long black hair in a gesture of childish comfort. The trust implicit in that touch strengthened his resolve more than any warrior's oath could have done. They reached the foothills of the Dragoon Mountains as the sun began its descent on the third day of their journey. Emma had grown quiet, conserving her energy as they navigated the increasingly rugged terrain. Her resilience continued to impress Takoda. Not once had she complained, even when brambles scratched her arms or sharp rocks cut into her feet through the thin soles of her shoes. Takoda paused atop a rise, scanning the landscape below. In a sheltered valley, partially hidden by a stand of cottonwoods and sycamores, lay the Apache camp, a collection of wickiups arranged in a loose circle, thin trails of smoke rising from cooking fires. Children darted between the structures like swallows, their voices carrying faintly on the evening breeze. "My people," Takoda said simply, pointing toward the encampment. Emma stiffened slightly on his shoulders, her first visible sign of nervousness. "Will they be angry that I'm white?" Takoda considered her question carefully. "Some may be cautious. White settlers have pushed us from our hunting grounds, burned our camps, killed our families." He felt her small body tense further. "But the Apache way is not to blame children for the actions of their elders, and you have your own story of suffering at white hands." He set her down gently, crouching to meet her eyes. "Remember, little owl, you are small but strong. Show them your courage, and they will see your worth." Emma nodded solemnly, straightening the tattered dress she had worn since leaving the Blackwood Ranch. With deliberate care, she brushed dust from the fabric and smoothed her tangled hair with her fingers. The gesture struck Takoda as both touching and dignified. A child preparing to face judgment with all the poise she could muster. Their approach to the camp did not go unnoticed. A sentry spotted them while they were still some distance away, raising the alarm with a sharp whistle. By the time they reached the outer perimeter of wickiups, a small crowd had gathered, expressions ranging from curiosity to open hostility. Nahimana, the elder who had led the band since Takoda's father passed to the spirit world, stepped forward. His weathered face revealed nothing as his gaze moved from Takoda to Emma and back again. "You return with strange company, Takoda," he said in Apache, his voice dry as autumn grass. Takoda responded in the same tongue. "I bring one who needed shelter, as our ancestors taught us to provide." "A white child," observed Kimmy, one of the tribal grandmothers, her eyes sharp despite her advanced years. "Why would you bring the child of our enemies among us?" Before Takoda could answer, Emma stepped forward. To everyone's astonishment, she lowered herself in a respectful gesture, eyes downcast, palms open at her sides, a perfect imitation of the traditional Apache greeting Takoda had shown her during their journey. A murmur ran through the gathered crowd. Nahimana's eyebrows rose slightly, the only crack in his impassive demeanor. "She learns quickly," Kimmy remarked, a hint of approval warming her tone. Takoda placed a protective hand on Emma's shoulder. "Her name is Emma," he said, switching to English so she could understand. "She was thrown into an old stone well by her stepfather, who blamed her for the drought that withered his crops. He saw her small size as a curse." Several of the women exchanged glances at this, for the Apache, like many tribes, considered children with unusual traits to be specially marked by the spirits. A Penniman, Takoda's cousin and a respected warrior, pushed through the crowd. His face darkened as he took in the scene. "Have you lost your mind? The white settlers will say we stole her. They will use this as excuse for more killing." "They believe she is dead," Takoda countered, "sacrificed to a well spirit. They will not look for her here." "You cannot know this," a Penniman insisted. One white child is not worth the risk to our entire people. Emma, though unable to understand the Apache words, clearly grasped the tension surrounding her presence. She stood perfectly still, her face composed, despite the fear she must have felt facing so many stern, unfamiliar faces. Kimmy stepped closer, her gnarled fingers reaching out to tilt Emma's chin upward. The old woman studied her face with the intensity of one reading signs in the stars. "This child has old eyes," she announced. "She has known suffering that would break many warriors." Switching to halting English, she addressed Emma directly. "Why you not cry, small one? Most children would weep with fear." Emma met the elder's gaze steadily. "Crying doesn't help anything," she replied. "Mother said tears are for washing away sadness when you're safe. I save mine for later." Kimmy's weathered face cracked into an unexpected smile, revealing teeth worn down by years of chewing hides and plants. Wise words from such a tiny mouth. She turned to address the tribe in Apache once more. "I have seen visions of a small one who would come from outside our people, bringing healing hands in days of sickness. Perhaps this child is that one." Nahimana frowned thoughtfully. "Kimmy's medicine dreams have proven true before," he acknowledged, "but the risk remains." The debate might have continued, but at that moment a young woman emerged from a nearby wickiup, a crying infant cradled against her chest. The baby's wails were thin and feeble, the sound instantly recognizable to any parent as the cry of a sick child. The young mother's eyes were hollow with exhaustion and worry. Emma's head turned toward the sound like a flower tracking the sun. Without hesitation, she stepped away from Takoda's protective presence and approached the young mother, her movements slow and gentle, as if approaching a wounded deer. "Your baby is sick," she said simply. "I know about sickness. My mother taught me." The young woman looked uncertainly to Nahimana and Kimi, clearly unsure how to respond to this tiny white child addressing her. But something in Emma's earnest expression must have touched her, for she knelt down, bringing the feverish infant to Emma's level. With unexpected confidence, Emma placed her small hand on the baby's forehead. "Fever wart tea," she said, looking up at Takoda. "Mother made it when I was sick with lung fever last winter, and cool cloths for his head." Kimmy's eyes widened slightly. "The child knows of fever wart?" she asked in Apache. Takoda translated Emma's words, adding, "Her mother was a healer of sorts, it seems." The old medicine woman studied Emma with renewed interest. "Perhaps the spirits have sent us what we need, when we need it most," she mused. "Several of our children have fallen ill with this same fever. Our own remedies have helped some, but not all." Dawn broke over the Apache camp, washing the wickiups in gold light. 7 days had passed since Takoda brought Emma to his people, 7 days of watchful eyes and whispered consultations as the tribe decided her fate. But in that time, Emma had begun working a quiet magic of her own. In the medicine wickiup, she moved among the sick children with Kimmy at her side, her tiny hands competent and gentle. 3 infants and 4 older children lay on pallets, their bodies fighting the fever that had swept through the camp. Emma spoke little, but observed everything: how Kimmy prepared the fever wart, how she sang healing songs, how she monitored each child's breathing and temperature. What Emma lacked in knowledge of Apache medicine, she made up for with her mother's remedies and an innate sense for soothing the suffering. The smallest patients responded to her especially well. Perhaps they found comfort in her child-sized hands, her face closer to theirs than the adult healers who tended them. "Little White Owl knows the language of small ones," Kimmy remarked to Nahimana as they watched Emma coax a fevered toddler into drinking a medicinal tea. "Her hands remember what our minds have forgotten, how the world looks through a child's eyes." Nahimana nodded slowly. Initial skepticism had gradually given way to grudging respect as he witnessed Emma's tireless work alongside Kimmy. Takoda's judgment was better than I believed, he admitted. But what becomes of her when she grows? Kimi's eyes twinkled with ancient wisdom. Who says she will grow like others? The spirits shape each vessel for its purpose. And by the 10th day, the fever had broken in all but one child, a baby girl born just before the last full moon. Her tiny body burned with stubborn heat that resisted all remedies. The mother, a young woman named Dayani, had not left her daughter's side, her face a mask of fear as the infant grew weaker. "She won't take the tea," Dayani whispered brokenly as Emma approached with another small cup of Kimi's remedy. "Her throat is too swollen." Emma studied the struggling infant, her brow furrowed in concentration. Then she turned to Kimi and made a series of gestures, communicating in the simple sign language they had developed to bridge their linguistic gap. Kimi nodded and disappeared, returning moments later with a small clay pot and strips of soft tanned deerskin. Under her guidance, Emma mixed a paste of herbs and spread it thinly on the strips. With delicate precision, she placed these poultices on the baby's chest, neck, and the soles of her tiny feet. "My mother did this when I couldn't swallow medicine," Emma explained to Dayani in her improving Apache, the words still halting but clear. "The skin drinks what the throat cannot." Through the night, Emma stayed beside the infant, replacing the poultices as they dried, monitoring every labored breath. Takoda watched from the entrance of the wickiup, his heart swelling with a pride he had not felt since his son's first steps. Near dawn, the baby's fever broke, her breathing eased, and she took her mother's milk for the first time in days. The news spread through the camp like wildfire. Little White Owl had saved Dayani's daughter when all seemed lost. The last resistance to Emma's presence melted away in the face of this small miracle. She became not just tolerated, but cherished, a daughter of the tribe in all but blood. Seasons turned, painting the desert in shifting colors. 2 winters passed, then 3, then 5. Emma grew in wisdom and skill, though her physical stature changed little. At 8 years old, she stood no taller than a child of 3, but her hands had become legendary throughout the territory. Healing hands that seemed to know instinctively where pain lived in the body and how to coax it away. The tribe moved with the rhythms of the land, but always stayed within the territory surrounding the Dragoon Mountains. Emma traveled with them, riding before Takoda on his horse during long journeys, her knowledge of both Apache ways and the white man's medicine expanding with each passing moon. Kimi, whose eyes had grown cloudy with age, taught Emma the sacred songs and stories of the people who had become her family. Takoda showed her how to move silently through the desert, how to read the stars and find water in seemingly barren places. From Dayani, whose daughter had grown into a lively 3-year-old, Emma learned to weave baskets so tightly they could hold water. News traveled even in the vast spaces of the territory. Occasionally, traders brought stories from the white settlements. Thomas Blackwood had lost his ranch, they said, driven to ruin by debt and drink after his wife's death. Some whispered that he was haunted by the ghost of the stepdaughter he had sacrificed, that he heard a child's cries echoing from his well on moonless nights. Emma listened to these stories with quiet detachment, as if they spoke of someone else's life. In a way, they did. The frightened child thrown into darkness had been reborn in the light of Apache fires, her spirit strengthened rather than broken by the crucible of her early years. On the evening of Emma's 10th birthday, a date she had chosen herself, the anniversary of her rescue from the well, Takoda presented her with a gift, a medicine pouch made from the softest buckskin, adorned with intricate beadwork depicting an owl in flight. "Little White Owl is no longer so little in spirit," he said, as the tribe gathered around the central fire. "She walks with the wisdom of the ancestors and the courage of a warrior." Emma accepted the pouch with characteristic gravity, her eyes, still large in her small face, shining with unshed tears. "Takoda found me in darkness," she replied, her Apache now fluent and musical. "He carried me to the light. My heart is Apache now, though my skin remains pale." Nahimana, his hair now completely white, but his back still straight as a lance, stepped forward. "The color of your skin matters less than the color of your spirit," he declared. "You have proven yourself a true daughter of the people." Later, as the celebration continued around them, Takoda and Emma sat slightly apart, watching the dancers circle the fire in intricate patterns of movement. "Do you ever wish to return to the white world?" Takoda asked softly. "To learn their healing ways?" Emma considered the question with the thoughtfulness that had always been her nature. "Sometimes I wonder what medicines they have that might help our people," she admitted. "But my place is here." My smallness frightened them, made them see evil where there was only difference. She looked up at the man who had become father, teacher, and protector. "Here, my size is seen as the spirit's design. I can reach places others cannot, treat the smallest children who fear larger hands." Takoda nodded, understanding completely. "The smallest key often opens the most important door." Emma smiled, leaning against his side as she had done since she was 3. Around them, the tribe moved in the ancient rhythms of celebration. Children playing games of skill, young men and women exchanging shy glances across the fire, elders passing down stories that had survived generations. In this circle of acceptance, a child once discarded had found her true home. The well that was meant to be her grave had instead become the dark passage to a life of purpose. What Thomas Blackwood had seen as a curse, her unchanging smallness, had revealed itself as a gift, allowing her to bridge worlds in ways no one else could. As the stars emerged above the Dragoon Mountains, Emma closed her eyes, feeling the drumbeat of the celebration resonating in her chest like a second heartbeat. She no longer needed to save her tears for safety. She had found that too, in the most unexpected of places. The Apache called her Nima Alchini, mother of children, though she was still a child herself. To the scattered white settlements who sometimes sought her healing skills, she became known simply as the smallest doctor, her legend growing inversely proportional to her size. But to Takoda, who had followed the cries of a desperate child into the darkness of an abandoned well, she would always be Little White Owl, the one who had taught him that the greatest courage often comes in the smallest packages, and that family is not about blood, but about who remains when the rest of the world turns away.